Welcome back to the Christian Youth Summit. Well, in the live chat and also in between sessions, we've been talking and we're covering a lot of even some heavy topics. And so it's a perfect thing to conclude our Youth Summit with this next talk, tactics. So Jonathan Noyes is going to do an awesome job. And so Jonathan, come up and help us engage and ask the right questions here.
Thank you so much, and it has been an absolute privilege to be able to participate in this summit with you guys. I can't say how grateful I am that you guys would be watching this online and participating with us here in the studio, giving of your time to discuss and learn about these really important issues like Stephen just said. You guys have hit up abortion, you've hit up LGBTQ stuff, you've hit up biblical archaeology. We talked yesterday, you and I, we talked about relativism and how that infiltrates the church and our belief system. And now I'd love to kind of introduce myself a little bit more than I was able to last night and share with you my story. Because my story actually starts as all good stories do with I met a girl, and her name's Rihanna, and I'm now married to her. And I was living in Washington, D.C., and then when I was in D.C., I was working as a paralegal. And in 2005, I got this urge. Something was driving me to California, the Southern California, Los Angeles area. And I flew out, and I eventually got a job very quickly and moved to Hollywood, California. And on my very first night in California, I was literally, my first night, I haven't even found a place to live yet, I met Rihanna. I was at a party and I was sitting outside on the balcony, and this amazing young woman walked in the door, and she's really loud and obnoxious in all the wonderful, great ways. And she comes in and she's laughing, and she just, Rihanna to this day has a way of taking over an entire room. And I had a reputation because my sister was living in California, so some people wanted to meet me. She was one of those, Rihanna was. And she walks full force out towards the patio to come meet me, and boom! She knocked right into the screen door, fell back on her bottom, hands back, flipped her hair back. And I remember it perfectly to this day. I remember the red sweater and the dark jeans. I remember her boots that she was wearing. And I remember most that she just laughed like it was normal, like this had happened before. And she had me right then and there. And then Rihanna and I started to date and started to get to know each other. And I didn't know it at the time, but about 2 months into our relationship, I've learned that she was a Christian. And you see, I was an atheist, and I was an ardent atheist, and I used to love to argue against Christianity, or any religion for that matter, but most of my people that I had in my sphere of influence were Christians that I could talk about this stuff to. And we'd go out for coffee or whatnot, and I'd ask them a lot of questions about their faith. Why do you believe what it is you believe? And unfortunately, my experience was, guys, that most of the time they couldn't really give me a great answer. They'd often say, well, the Bible says this. And I'd say, well, why should I trust the Bible? Give me an argument. I want to know why I can trust the Bible as not only reliable historically, but also the Word of God. You know, why should I abandon my atheism for what you're saying is true? And I wasn't really met with many answers. And over the course of a couple relationships and some books and a pastor, and I eventually found some answers to my intellectual doubts. And also I dug into Scripture, and in that encounter with the Word of God, God got really a hold of my heart and softened it. But it came through a lot of time and effort on other people's relationships. And one of the things I look back on, why I'm sharing this story with you right now, is because I don't want you to go into conversations unequipped. I would love to share with you over the next 40 minutes what I wish those Christians 15 years ago, 13 years ago, would have been able to share with me. So I want to give you some advice on how you can engage those people that God has placed in your life that don't believe like you do, in a way that doesn't make you look weird or strange, or it doesn't make you look aggressive, or it doesn't place much pressure on you. You see, so I'm going to make you a promise, okay? I'm going to make you a promise. We're 5 minutes into this talk, so I've got 35 minutes with you that I want to give you a game plan that's going to allow you to converse with confidence in any situation. No matter how little you know about any of these topics, no matter how aggressive or how knowledgeable or even how obnoxious your counterpart, your interlocutor is going to be. It's a game plan it's simple to follow. You guys are going to be amazed at how simple it is, I think, actually. This game plan changed my life when I learned how to ask just a few questions. Paul says this. He says, conduct yourself with wisdom towards outsiders, making the most of every opportunity. Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned, as it were, with salt, so that you'll know how you should respond to each person. There's a few things I just want to point out as we begin this conversation. A tactic. How do we engage people with the information that we're learning this weekend? First and foremost, we always want to be graceful. We want to be nice. It's that simple. We want to engage them. It's a speech seasoned with salt. We want to be smart. We want to be knowledgeable, is what Paul's saying here. But also we want to be tactical. So we want to know how to respond. But also notice the last word in this verse here. Respond to each person. We don't ever want to lose sight of the fact that we are speaking to a person. No matter how aggressive that person is, they're a human being. And no matter their belief, we talked yesterday that they're made in the image of God because they live in the world that God has made. And if they lived in the world that God has made, they have to abide by his rules, whether they like it or not. And they're going to bump into those things as they live. But the fundamental principle that you and I think, need to understand is that when we look at these people, when we're talking to our friends who don't believe like we do, they're image bearers. That means they're of infinite value and worth, just like you and me, no matter what they believe about God. So don't let that be lost on us as we engage. So you want to be smart, you want to be nice, you want to be tactical, and you want to make sure that you don't lose sight of the fact of who they are. So let's start here. I go all over the country speaking, and then also I go to a ton of different conferences with some really smart people, and I get that fortune of sitting under some amazing teachers. But oftentimes, if I'm being honest with you guys, I get really overwhelmed. I mean, some of you right now, watching the last few sessions, you might feel a little overwhelmed. It's been a long day, and overwhelmed by the amount of information that you're being given. I know that's the way that I feel sometimes, and I think that I struggle to figure out how to use the information. And I think that's because there's a missing link between the content and the conversation, between the scholarship and the relationship. There's a missing bridge. You see, we learn this wonderful information. You and I, we've been listening to amazing presenters over the last 24 hours. But how do we now relate the information that we've been told to the people that need to hear it most? And I think that this is an insight that can change your approach. It's part of my promise to you in the next 30 minutes or so. I think that we can create a bridge where we get to relate the information that we've been told to the people who need to hear it most. And it has to do with gardening and harvesting. And pay attention here, because when I learned this, I felt a sense of weight just lift off of me. Because before, when I was a brand new Christian, I don't know if you guys remember when you became a brand new Christian, you were so excited and you had the zeal for God and you just had to tell everybody about him. But then I get out into the real world and I got beat up because I didn't know all the answers. Or the people that I love most in this world, they don't know who Jesus is yet. So I get disappointed and I feel this weight that I have to convert everybody. And I think that there's a fundamental a principle that sometimes we miss, and the terms are gardening and harvesting. And before there's any harvest in any individual person's life, there has to be a season of gardening. Most people have a season of considering the gospel. I know I did when I was being ministered to. That's when I was forming relationships with my new friends who were knowledgeable Christians, and when I was getting to know my wife. There was a long season of gardening before I relented to the Christian world, before I abandoned my naturalism for Christianity. I mean, let's like if I'm thinking back on it, I mean, I spent a long time pushing back at the worldview that I was looking at Christianity. I was pushing back into my own worldview as I reconsidered the way the world really was, and I was confronted with the reality of a moral depth. We talked about that yesterday a little bit. During that time, often a number of Christians, I think, this time of considering, they make small contributions. I know they did in my life. They made a small contribution to make me the person I am today. So hear what I'm saying here, and know it better yet, hear what Jesus has to say about this, okay? And this is right out of Jesus' mouth, recorded by John, and he says, "Do not say there are yet 4 months, and then comes the harvest. Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look on the fields, that they are white for the harvest. Already who reaps is receiving wages and is gathering fruit for eternal life, so that he who sows and he who reaps," I love this, "can rejoice together. For in this case, the saying is true, one sows, the other reaps. I sent you to reap that for which you have not labored. Others have labored, and you have entered into their labor." You see, there's a couple things to point out. First is there are 4 months, then comes the harvest. There are 2 different seasons, a season of gardening and then a season of harvesting. Also notice here that there's 2 different people, groups of people who, one group is people who sow, and the other is the people who reap. So there's a group of people out there that are focused on just making little contributions. And then there's another group of people out there that are reaping the harvest. They see the white field and they pluck the fruit. And it's not necessarily the same person. And now that I've been a Christian for now 13 years, I've come to the understanding that most people aren't harvesters. Harvesting can be hard, but I think most people are gardeners. And I think gardening is harder still because it's a consistency in somebody's life. And when I realized this, and this is why I'm sharing this with you, I realized that I'm not responsible for converting my friends. I'm not responsible for praying a prayer with them and getting them into the kingdom of God. God does all that. Only God can do that. The Holy Spirit is responsible for turning that hard heart into a heart of flesh. I can't do that no matter how badly I want. But I can be a gardener. I can be responsible enough with the information that I have and share it with the people who need to know it most. And when the time is right, when that fruit is ripe, a harvester will come along. I can trust the Lord to use somebody else if it's not me, and do that together is what we need to talk about as well. They rejoice together. So what they do is the harvesters and the gardeners, you and I, we're faithful with what God has given us, and then we use it. And when the time is right, we are able to celebrate when those people come into the kingdom. So here's the takeaway from John 4. There's 2 seasons. There's 2 kinds of workers. There's 1 team, and there is 1 Lord over the whole process, and we can trust that. So how do I make the most, knowing this, how do I make the most of the brief opportunities that I have with my family and friends to share the good news? My goal, like I said before, I don't actually ever go into a conversation with somebody saying, you know what, I'm going to convert this person on the spot. I'm going to pray a prayer with them. Actually, to be honest, if I'm being honest with you guys, oftentimes when I go into a conversation, my goal isn't even necessarily, and this is going to be scandalous for some of us, my goal oftentimes isn't even to share the gospel. My goal is to put a stone in their shoe. What I want to do is I want to get them thinking about Jesus. Have you guys ever gotten a stone in your shoe and then you walk away and you limp and you feel it there? It doesn't go away. It's distracting. It's something you can't get out of your mind. Well, that's what I want to do with the information that you guys have been learning. That's what I want to do with what I know when I'm talking to the people that God has placed in my life. I want to put a stone in their shoe so they go away limping in a very good way, thinking about Jesus. But how can I make a little bit of progress? How can I move these people that I'm talking about a little closer to Christ? Well, these are great questions. We just have to initiate a conversation. But we do it in a way that allows us to kind of test the waters a little bit. That I said at the onset of this, I don't want you guys to seem weird. I don't want to seem weird when I'm doing it. I want to do this in a way that protects us from getting trapped or looking foolish, or even more importantly, making Jesus or the gospel look foolish. I want to do it in a way that keeps us from getting in over our heads, maybe. And how do we defend our faith without being defensive or offensive? I don't want to be offensive to anybody. The gospel, friends, the gospel is offensive enough. There's no need to add any offense to it. I mean, we're ultimately telling people that they're sinners, that they've broken the law of God and they're deserving of punishment. That's offensive. It was to me as an atheist. That was offensive. So how do we do it not adding any offense to it? I think we need a game plan, and that's what I want to share with you. I'm not looking to get into a fight, because when we get into fights, nothing good comes from it. I think about it, if I get mad, I lose. If the person you're talking to, gets mad, you lose, and then if you both get mad, well, you lose. So it's a I lose situation if we're getting into a fight. This I think is one of the values of using a tactical approach and memorizing a few questions in order to engage people, because we go into these conversations prepared, and then we can stay calm, and oftentimes we don't have to escalate to a point where we get emotional and start to fight with people, and that's why we need to go back to that game plan. And at Stand to Reason, we offer a ton of different tactics. We've got the Rhodes Scholar. We've got Taking Off the Roof, which we looked at briefly last night. We've also got, I love the mini tactic that just came out in Greg Koukল's newest edition of tactics. It's called What a Friend I Have in Jesus. But there's one tactic. That's the queen mother of all tactics. It's the one that guides all of these, actually, ultimately. And it's called the Columbo tactic, and that's what we're going to go over in the next few minutes. Most of you guys watching, if you're under the age of 30, you probably don't know who this guy is, and this is who the tactic is named after. This is Lieutenant Columbo, and he is just how he looks. He's a character from a television show. He's a detective, and he looks dumb as a doorknob. And he acts like it too in the show. It's a really funny show, actually. And what he'll do is he'll go into a crime scene and he'll act like he doesn't know what's going on, and he looks foolish. He never has a pencil to take any notes, so he's trying to borrow stuff, and he's always wearing this trench coat that looks like, I don't know, he slept in it. Totally disheveled, but he asks questions. And that's where the name of this comes from, Columbo. It's this here, friends. This is the one tactic that I use more than anything else. When I learned this, it literally changed the way I spoke to people. It changed the way that I communicate the gospel. It changed the way that I discuss these hard issues like abortion. It's amazing what happens. And I think it's the simplest tactic that we could possibly imagine to help you stop a challenger in his tracks, turn the tables, and get him thinking. I want to give this to you because when I was talking to my Christian friends 15 years ago, 13 years ago, they didn't have these tactics. And I think it's a valuable thing. So, and also it's almost effortless. Like when you guys learn this, it's going to be amazing. It's almost effortless and it's going to put you in the driver's seat of a conversation. It's a very powerful thing. And basically, it's asking questions. And I think that we should always be asking questions. It's a habit that you guys want to get into. It's just a good life habit that you want to get into. The key to the Columbo tactic is the Christian goes on the offensive in an inoffensive way with carefully selected questions to proactively advance the conversation. So what I'm doing is I'm taking control of a conversation, never getting behind the ball, and then I'm able to winsomely communicate whatever it is I want to communicate. So Columbo is our game plan. So why questions? That's a good question. Questions are polite. It's a good way to start a conversation. They get you valuable information about somebody's worldview. Takes the focus off of us. Everybody likes to talk about themselves. It's just a matter, I do, everybody does. So when you're asking questions, the focus is on the person that you're talking to, not on you. It takes the pressure off, and maybe most importantly, it keeps you in the driver's seat. Also, understand that when you're asking questions and you're gaining information, we're going to go over this in a minute, when you're gaining information, it helps you accurately depict what that person believes, because we don't ever want to miscategorize or mischaracterize somebody else's view. We want to make sure we're understanding people correctly, and the way that we do that is by using questions. It's a wonderful habit. There are 3 uses for Columbo. Unfortunately, today with the 20 minutes I have left, I only have time to give you the 2 uses and then a tactic to get out of the hot seat, which is going to be fun. So we're going to go pretty quick, and we're going to have a time of question and answer after. So if you have questions, you're not understanding something, make sure you jot the questions down as they're happening, and then just type them in to the comment section, and we'd love to answer them for you. But I think the first 2 the ways that we use Columbo are going to be enough to get you started, even today. And like I said, if you guys want to buy Greg Koukl's newest edition, all this stuff is in there. He's got 3 chapters on Columbo alone, and then an expanded section, 40% new material, and it's well worth your time. So, okay, let's get into the first way we use Columbo. The first application is to gather information, like we said. It's the simplest way to use the Columbo tactic. It's virtually effortless on your part. When you find yourself with an opportunity to make a spiritual impact in somebody's life, the only thing I want you to think about is gathering information. That's all you're doing. You're having a conversation. This is just a conversation. I'm not going into it deceptively. I'm not going into it with an ulterior motive. I just want to have a conversation with somebody. I want to form a relationship if I don't already have a relationship with that person. And tactics, and questions do that. Sometimes you need information in order to proceed in a conversation. So a question can be a casual conversation starter. A question can help you know how to proceed in the conversation. A question can buy you valuable time in a conversation if you don't necessarily know how to respond. All you need to do is ask a question. Also, the first step is in critical thinking. The first step in thinking critically about the world around us is to clarify a claim. And how do you clarify a claim? It's through a question. It's super simple. So our first question here is, what do you mean by that? Now, everybody that's watching right now, if you're watching, I want you to say out loud, what do you mean by that? Good job. See, it's not that hard, right? It's not that hard. Turn to the person next to you and say, what do you mean by that? There you go. See, it really, it doesn't need to be, what do you mean by that always? There are variations. But this is a fundamental clarifying question. It's delivered in a mild, genuinely inquisitive fashion. You're going, like I said, you want to be genuine in this. It's not something that's just scripted. You want to genuinely understand where the other person's coming from and what they're communicating to you. This question, it also tells us what a person thinks, so you don't misunderstand them, like I said. That's vitally important. How many times have you gotten into a conversation, like, I'm going to jump ahead for a second here because it's important, I think, for the point, where somebody says, I don't believe in God. Well, you ask the question, well, what do you mean by God? Because when I was an atheist, I would have said, I don't believe in that sky daddy that throws fire from the sky and punishes innocent people. Well, now as a Christian, I don't believe in that God either. So we're not even talking about the same God. You see how that clarifying question helps clarify the conversation. I don't need to address that God because that God isn't the one that I believe in. If you want to talk to me about God, let's talk about the one that I believe in. And also it helps us, like, I don't want to, there's a thing called a straw man fallacy. I don't want to attack or try to answer a challenge that's actually not the person's challenge or question. I want to get at the heart of the matter. I want to stay true to what the person believes. So let's do some examples here. So let's just, we're going to skip to the examples because this is the fun part. Okay. What happens when somebody says there is no God? What are you guys going to ask? I kind of just gave you the answer. There is no God. What do you mean by God? All right, how about this one? I'm an atheist. Oh, really? What do you mean by atheist? Because there's different brackets of atheism. What's that mean to you? Everything's relative. We kind of looked at this last night. Well, what do you mean by relative? What do you mean by everything? You can question both words in this one. What do you, everything? Is that statement relative? We kind of went over that last night. Often, I'm asked, can you give me I have an atheistic friend that I'm trying to minister to. I'm trying to understand where they're coming from. Can you give me a good book on atheism? And my response back to them is why do you want a book on atheism? Why don't you just go talk to your atheist friend and ask him a ton of questions about it? Ask him what he means by atheism. Ask him what he means by all the things that he's trying to say. What do you? All that exists is physical stuff. Wow, that's really interesting. I don't really know what that means. What do you mean when you say all that exists is just physical? So are you saying that there's nothing outside of the physical realm? What about the laws of logic? Questions. They get you engaged. And also in this context, you're forming a relationship with somebody. And the relationship is so important. It gets us to where we need to be. And then let's think here. This is one we looked at yesterday. You're intolerant. Well, how do we address this with this tactic? I think it's simple. Sometimes we hear this they phrase it not you're intolerant. They just don't say it outright like that. They'll say you shouldn't force your views on me. And you guys, I think in the last session on the abortion talk, in that context we often hear this objection. The question you can ask is, well, specifically, how am I forcing my views on you right now? Because I'm disagreeing with you? Well, you're intolerant. You think you're right? So if you think you're right and I think I'm right, are we both intolerant? Because of course we both think we're right. We wouldn't discuss the things that we're discussing. I wouldn't make truth claims if I didn't think they were actually true. So you think what you think is true, and I think what I think is true, and of course this is where it is. It doesn't make us intolerant, but you can get there by asking questions. And here's a little bit of a tactical insight, and this I think alone, if you guys take nothing away from this talk other than this, I think it's worth it. I'm not the only one in conversations that thinks I'm right. Whenever you're having a conversation with somebody and they're making a claim, they always think they're right. Nobody makes claims thinking they're wrong. So keep that in mind when you're talking to people and they say stuff like this. And this is ultimately when they resort to things like you're intolerant, it's just name calling. I like to say when somebody says this to me, like sometimes my brother will say this, like, why are you so intolerant? I'll say, why are you so ugly? Whoa! And it stops the conversation in a second, in an instant. And then I'll explain to him, well, you're just calling me a name, so I figured I'd just call you a name. Can we just talk about it? Well, what do you mean intolerant? And then it opens us up, slows the conversation, and gets us going in another direction. So when people address this, when they raise these objections, this is the question we're going to ask. What do we mean by that? Now, one of the things that I've found in years of doing this now is somebody will make a claim to me, and I'll ask them this question, and I'm not met with an answer. I'm met with what I call the Simon and Garfunkel answer. It is the sounds of silence. Now, most of you probably don't even know who Simon and Garfunkel are. It makes me a little sad, but that's okay. They're not met with any answers because they don't know the answers. Oftentimes, people just regurgitate what they've heard. So when they make a claim, they're just saying what they've heard somebody else say and they think it sounds good. And when you say, whoa, that's interesting, what do you mean by that? Boom, silence. This happened to me a few years ago and it sticks out in my mind right now. I have a cousin who's an ardent atheist and he says, all religions are basically the same. And I said, really? In what ways? And I said, hey, can you spell that out for me? Well, he had never actually studied any religions, so he really couldn't say anything about any of them. And it was just crickets. So this is the first application. See how easy it is, guys? It's not complicated. Sometimes we make things complicated. What do you mean by that? That's all you need to ask. There's other variations. Give you some more examples. Okay, do you believe in evolution? What do you mean by evolution? Because there's different types of evolution. What about all the evil in the world? Whoa. What do you mean by evil? What do you mean by bad? Where'd you get that idea from? Do you take the Bible literally? Well, what do you mean by literally? It depends on what that word means to you, I think, before I can answer that. What specifically are you getting at? Science has disproven God. We get this one a lot. Science has disproven, really? Precisely, how has science disproven God? That's another variation. Abortion is okay because the fetus is a human, but not a person. I get that one often. Wow. I'm really curious. What makes something a human and not a person? These are good questions to be asking folks. So make sure we do it effectively. The Columbo tactic, it engages the person. It shows an interest in the person. It causes the person to think. This is really important, this point here, because not only do we want to show somebody necessarily they're wrong. I mean, it's good when we're right because we want to hold right beliefs about the world. But we also want people to think about their view. Oftentimes, guys, when you ask good questions, it stops the person. They introspect, meaning they start asking themselves questions, and sometimes they come to their own conclusions. That's the way it happened with me. I eventually started asking questions about the way the world really was because I was bumping into reality as an atheist. It stopped me, and I had to think about the way the world was and if my worldview lined up with it. So, this is what we can accomplish, right? There's no pressure. It's just a question. And also notice we're not offering any answers. This is key as we look at the next application. This is our second application of Columbo that we're going to look at. And this one has to do with reversing the burden of proof. And I don't know if you guys know what burden of proof means. It's the responsibility to defend or give evidence for your view. Generally speaking, the rule of thumb is that when a person makes a claim, that person bears the burden of proof to show that claim is true. Oftentimes, and this is a really good point to take home. Oftentimes, we thrust ourselves into a posture of defensiveness because we try to rush into a conversation showing somebody that we're right and they're wrong, without letting them talk and bear the burden for their claim. It's important, and it's a free ride for the person ultimately. If they're making a claim, not having to prove it, somebody will say, I can't believe the Bible is not historically reliable. Oh yeah? Well, what about the 24,000 manuscripts that we have? And how come they all line up? And how come, we get most of our ancient Middle Eastern history from the Bible? And we just start offering answers instead of just taking the pressure off of us and saying, oh, well, what do you mean by that? Why don't you tell me about your claim? And this is where this second tactic really comes in, taking that burden off of us. Christians should get out of the habit of trying to refute every story a non-believer can spin or every claim he manufactures. We take on too much. We got to place the burden of proof back on your friends who disagree with us. They're making claims too. It's important also, guys, as we're looking at this and about to wrap up, an alternate explanation isn't a refutation. And what I mean by that is I hear it all the time. Okay, I only believe in one less God. I'm an atheist. I just believe in one less God. You believe in God, the one God. I believe in one less God. Well, you got to do better than that. All you're doing is spinning a ball of yarn. And I need more than that if you're gonna try to come at me with stuff. back in the day when knights would want to fight, what they do is they take their gauntlet, their glove off, and they throw it into the arena. And okay, now it's time to fight. It's time to go to battle. And I think that in order to do that, you got to bring more than just a story. You got to bring evidence and proof, and you got to be able to discuss that. And alternative explanations are like bedtime stories sometimes. And you don't automatically win when you throw your gauntlet in. You don't automatically win if you spin a creative story. Sometimes when we are engaging with our unbelieving friends, sure, their stories, man, they have rhetorical power and force. They're effective to psychologically kind of dislodge us, but not everything that somebody says is even possible. And even if it's possible, it might not be plausible. And even if it's plausible, it might not be probable. And sometimes we just want to slow things down and just call it like it is and say, well, that's a really great story, and let me let you bear the burden of proof on this. I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to do it in a way that makes them defend their views, and I'm going to ask this question: how did you come to that conclusion? How did you come to that conclusion? This is the second step of critical thinking, actually. It's to determine the reasons for any given claim. How'd you come to that conclusion? Okay, everybody repeat after me. How'd you come to that conclusion? That's right. So the first question, what do you mean by that, is followed by how'd you come to that conclusion? What are your reasons for holding that view? Why do you hold the view that you do? What's your evidence is another way to say it. Why is that idea seem convincing to you? Explain this to me. And oftentimes, guys, again, when you ask this question, you're going to be met with silence. Because sometimes people just don't think about what they're saying. As I said before, they're just regurgitating stuff. And we're not doing it to make somebody look silly. We don't want people to look silly. But we want people to think intelligently and logically about the ideas that they are putting out there. And one way to do that is make sure that they bear the burden by asking these great questions. Okay? And the most important step here in this, when you ask this question, is it shows why they believe what they believe. When we talk about evolution in science, oftentimes scientists, evolutionists, they're really good at spinning a ball of yarn. But it's a fairy tale. Richard Dawkins, for example, he did this wonderfully in The Blind Watchmaker, which is a great book, but he spins a fairy tale in it where he's discussing how animals evolved to fly. And he says, oh, well, small animals, they used to fall out of trees. And over time, they would learn how to spread their skin out. And it's a great story. But where'd all the information that had to come in at a specific moment in time, and where'd how the mutations lead to this? How'd you come to that conclusion, Dr. Dawkins? We should ask. So this is the second step, and really quickly, with just 2 minutes left, I want to show you guys how to get out of the hot seat. You're talking to somebody. I have a friend. His name's Louis. And he's a PhD from MIT in marine biology. This guy knows his stuff. And I didn't know him when I started interacting with him. Very quickly, I realized that I was talking about scientific things. He knew way more than I did. And I was just in over my head. What do I do? Do I freak out and panic and run? No. Take notes of this, guys, because it's really important. This is what I said. This is how I got out of the hot seat. I sit back. I say, Louis, you obviously know way more about this than I do. I'm going to take out a pencil. I'm going to take out a pad of paper. I want you to teach me all about this, and I'm going to take notes and then get back to you. You see what happened there? Is I was, number one, honest. Wow, Louis, you know a lot about this. Maybe you could help me understand it. I'm going to take notes. You slow everything down. You take the pressure off of yourself going into an area that you don't know. And also you get free education. And then the important part here, guys, is if you say you're going to get back to them, you got to get back to them. And then I go and do a little bit of research and I say, hey, I found this in the literature. How's this sound? And then next thing you know, look what's happening. A dialogue with questions. I don't bear the burden of proof here. I get to ask questions and seem intelligent. So here in the last 40 minutes now, I got 30 seconds here. I think my promise was fulfilled. We don't need to swing for the fences, guys. We don't even need to get on base. All we need to do is get up into the batter's box, ask some questions about what people believe and why they believe it. And when we get into the hot seat, just sit back and take some notes. This has been amazing, and it's gone by so quick, guys. And I'm looking forward to the question and answer, which is just going to come up. Yeah. But for now, Stephen.
Yeah, Jonathan.
That was a fast 40 minutes.
I know, it lied by, huh? Isn't this awesome that it's not our burden, right? We can ask these questions, and it makes it so much more simple to just start the dialogue and go.
A conversation.
Hey, like this video, subscribe, share it. And then also, we're going to be back in just 10 minutes. So a shorter break, and then we're going to do Q&A. So Cooper's going to get a slide up. As soon as we go off air, he's going to get the next video slide up. So come right back in about 4 minutes, and you're going to be able to start asking your questions right away on that next video before we even go live. So let's see the questions, right, Cooper? We want to see some questions coming in. We'll see you guys in 10 minutes, but come back and start asking some questions on the video in about 4. See you guys soon.
See you then.